So, Stefano, I thought we could start with starting with your journey, from starting with your father's business, who was already in fashion showroom, very traditional in Italy, to founding Tomorrow. And if you could maybe share a little bit about that journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, actually. I was born in a fashion family in Italy. My father.
Lucky you.
Well, I don't know. It's the only family I met. So, my father was a sales agent. Where sales agency were an innovation in the industry in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I grew up with these wonderful showrooms and the upcoming designers of the era, which were Valentino, Saint Laurent, Montana, Gaultier.
Wow. A good era to grow up in.
A good era. Enrico Coveri, Fendi, Romeo Gigli. I had a pleasure to meet them all when I was a child. So naturally fascinated by my father's job and his trips. I was spending my summers, holidays working at the showroom. Cafeteria first. Fitting model then when I was the right size for for a Valentino suit.
Wow.
So of course you're learning a lot by that. So I started working on a full-time when I started my university courses in Bologna, and I enjoyed a lot. I loved it.
But did you study fashion, or were you more in business?
I studied business, well, not business, economy. With back then it was Romano Prodi was the dean of Bologna. Romano Prodi then became the prime minister in Italy. But it was a completely different course. It was not business, it was economy, more political economy. It didn't resonate a lot with the business. And the business was the office. My father's company was quite exciting.
Yeah.
And I learned fast, because you have to learn fast when you are in fashion. Worked as an assistant for Valentino menswear for a couple of years, and then started to expressing my own opinion on fashion trends and some. So my father was quite conservative, but then I fell in love with Helmut Lang. I loved it. It was so different. It was probably 1992 or 3 or 4. I can't really remember the date. And my father was like, "Yeah, I get it, but there's no branding, there's no logo." Back then it was all about Dolce & Gabbana, Calvin Klein, Versace jeans couture. It was the era of these second lines, the diffusion lines. And I managed to convince him to sign Helmut Lang, and it was a wonderful experience. For 4 years, I've been sort of a link between Helmut's Vienna office and the Italian licensing partner and their network of agencies, because I spoke English, basically, and which was a bit of a rarity back then in Italy. And then I started working with other designers like Dirk Bickenberg, Walter von Behrendonck. So I was the trendy guy in the organization.
Yeah, almost anti-establishment in a way.
It was. Of course, you're young and everybody else is wearing a suit, and you don't. You really don't. Loose fit jeans and big chunky sneakers and collar on her hairs.
No three-piece suit.
No three-piece suit for me. So it was a very interesting experience. I decided at some point I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and it's not easy to work in someone else's company, even if that someone else is your father. And I basically did a spin-off of the business and started my own agency slash distribution company in Italy. Becoming the distributor of a Japanese jeans brand, Evisu, that you probably remember. It was such an incredibly creative brand with Aida Koyamane designing these incredibly couture premium denim.
And it revolutionized sort of what used to be Levi's only.
It totally changed the price point. Levi's was back then the equivalent of €89 retail, and Evisu was €300 retail. And that opened the door to a sneaker company to understand there was a scope to sell sneakers for 3 times the price. And I started working with Puma on the Black Station, was a division of Puma made around collaborations. In 1999, it was actually Puma, not Nike, as a lot of people think, to be the first company really working in collaborations. They started with Jill Sander, then they went into a Japanese designer called Mihara.
Wow, yeah, which still exists today,
Which still exists today. Lee McQueen, Neil Barrett. Great. And then we relaunched their vintage brand Rudolf Dassler with a very young and extremely talented Riccardo Tisci as a designer director. Wow. And then we started working with Fake London, talking about circularity, recycling, upcycling. Phenomenal upcycling cashmere collection. Yeah. So we created the first lifestyle multi-brand company where you were basically wearing sneakers from Puma, jeans from Hamizu, and cashmere tops from Fake. And that was my beginning of my entrepreneurial career.
So fast forward to today, where I love this description that I found of Tomorrow London, which is a diversified fashion group which supports entrepreneurial creativity, both as a business accelerator and a development partner. And I love this idea of like Tomorrow London being, or tomorrow being sort of the equivalent of the Y Combinator in tech, which sort of supercharges these incredible creative entrepreneurs and takes them along this journey, sort of shepherds them to then become sort of some of the biggest brands known to humankind. And I think that you have been doing this for the last few decades now. And I'm really curious, because you have got amazing case studies with, for example, a Coldwell, with Martine Rose, Charles Jeffrey, so many incredible brands that you have taken, Coperni. And I would love to understand, what is it about these brands that now, as a business with many, many different arms, what is it about these brands that get you excited to sort of bring them into tomorrow as that family and help them sort of amplify their brand messages and their product?
Listen, there was a learning in my previous career, and my learning was when I worked with Raf Simons for 5 years. When my first experience on manufacturing, product development on top of sales and distribution. So it was obvious that operations, manufacturing, the working capital connected to manufacturing were the critical pain points, which prevented an incredible talent like Raf to scale to a much bigger size. And that obviously led to all of these designers to look for an alternative strategy for success, which was leading them to design for maisons, where resources were unlimited, the creativity could flow in the capable hands of artisans, able to translating their designs and dreams into the best product in the world. I found then, and I always found that I feel sorry that these creative entrepreneurs cannot express their own vision under their own eponymous label because of constraints and restrictions. Right. So when we effectively evolved into Tomorrow, because it wasn't funded, it was like merged between two companies, evolved into Tomorrow's. With Jens and Eric, Jens Grede and Eric Tortenson.
For Saturday Group at the time.
Yeah, for the Saturday Group at the time. The idea was to create a multi-layer platform to support the brands under all the possible needs. One was definitely wholesale distribution, the other was marketing and PR. But there was also always the elephant in the room, which was working capital and manufacturing. Yeah. So,
which is so funny because it's an elephant in the room, and yet it's the most crucial.
It's the most crucial and
element of any creative business.
That's quite an interesting approach. Nobody talks about it, right? It's not fashionable to talk about the cash part of the business. So we developed Tomorrow as a distributor for 5-6 years. It went very well. We attracted investment. Giancarlo and I bought the majority of the business, and we quietly transformed the business from a distribution platform into a brand incubator and accelerator. What we learned is that none of the individual brands can afford to pay for the right overheads internally.
Right.
You cannot expect a small brand to have a CEO, a production director, a CFO, not to mention compliance or tax, legal, etc., etc. Advise, marketing in the form of, strategize or organize marketing, etc., etc. So the only possibility was clearly to form a group of individuals, a C-suite, who can service multiple businesses on a part-time basis, but with a deep knowledge of the industry. On the backbone of this idea, shared services, we then, we'd like to repeat that we have one superpower, which is talent scouting. Talent scouting in terms of being methodical, repeatable, and global. And we do invest a lot of money and great resources under the leading guidance of Julie Keart at the group to do that. So access to talent was never a problem.
Right.
We receive thousands of inbound applications every year, but we review, scrutinize hundreds and hundreds of brands' profile, and we entertain relationship with many brands which we are not currently in business with.
Right.
A mentoring relationship, an advisory relationship, holding hands sometimes, relationship. So we learned all their needs. We started envisaging what was our investment style and who was the right partner. So we decided to go with entrepreneurial creativity, meaning that we want to invest in funders who want to create their own brands as a sizable business or sizable enough business to create jobs, to be meaningful, to have a message. And obviously we wanted to filter that decision on the between individuals and value propositions.
Right.
So obviously, naturally we wanted to be a force, a supportive force for the right people, embodying the right values, talking to the right communities.
Right.
And then, as many times happens, instead of us deciding, someone else decided for us. So Samuel Ross. We were forming this idea and we were distributing Samuel's collection. Obviously, the demand was pretty high, and he came to us and said, guys, it's all great, but we are tripling the sales every 5 minutes here, and I cannot cope with this business. What will we do? I say, okay, maybe it's time to apply the theory. And in a very, very short amount of time, we created a business model, and we invested into Equal Wall, and we licensed the brand.
Wow.
The overall idea was, and still is, to release the time available to the creative funder to create, curate the community, work on products, marketing, messaging, rather than spending his or her time on operations like customer service, logistics, shipments, or production.
And so tomorrow, for all these brands that you've decided to partner with and entrepreneurial creatives, you're able to sort of take away the logistics and the sort of pain points of building a business so that they can all be very creative and sort of share their unique proposition.
That is actually the proposition and the ideal target. The reality is that we, of course, step by step try to adapt our offering to the character of the founder. And obviously, Martin is different than Samuel. Samuel is different from Arnaud and Seb Coperni. And Charles is different from all the others. And Daniel Arsham is obviously an accomplished international artist.
Not at all in the fashion
business. And we have different relationships with our brands, which we are more on the back seat rather than being operating the businesses. What they normally want is to be free to create, to be able to express themselves, to be able to have a long-term plan. What we are trying to offer them, hopefully being more successful most times, is definitely removing wholesale sale, physical distribution, invoicing, credit collection, all the financial part, the governance part of the business, product development, sampling, manufacturing, which means we hire dozens at this point in time, product developers, fabric buyers, production directors, and so forth and so on, so they can plug in and play into an existing platform. That doesn't mean that we own 1,500 factories, or we are perfect, or we are able to provide them with the same level of service of LVMH or Kering ateliers. But in the circumstances we have, on the size of the business we have a reasonably large enough network of suppliers who can, I would say, accomplish most of the product categories they desire to develop. Wow. And I love to say, in a seamless relationship with them, in the best relationship we can manage, we make it through every season in delivering the product they want, for the most part. Yeah. And we stay committed to improve that every season. There's a lot of investment in scouting of factories, ateliers, and manufacturing partners, and we are solidifying relationships. And I notice we're getting better every season in doing what we do. So yes, ultimately, they will be able, if they wanted, to focus on the creative part only.
I would imagine you're one of the only businesses I know who can vertically integrate and who are sort of excited and driven by the ability to offer sort of, from everything along the value chain, because you obviously have the mega groups, the LVMHs and the Kerings, and alongside that sort of the power, the money, the cash that they have to pump into this thing. And I think it's very, and I want to say David and Goliath, even though you're by no means as small as a David, because I definitely think that you have surpassed that. But I'm curious what, it can't be easy, I would imagine.
No, by no means. It's not easy at all. And
so what drives, in terms of even finding production and factories, and even just, the platforms that you offer, the brands that you work with, how do you sort of keep it nimble, because you don't want to grow with too much overhead and become all of a sudden sort of bloated vertically in a way?
The real answer is that those independent brands need the same level of services and the same quality of content, product, outputs than the large brands.
Right.
And the reality is that the campaign needs to be at a certain level, the fashion show needs to be a certain level, and the product quality needs to be a certain level. Tomorrow was able to begin this new journey on the back of a very successful business. We weren't funded from scratch and tried to do it. We have been running a business. I have been running a business for 25 years, the last 6 before pivoting into this business model with a very successful distribution company. That creates, processes, establishes, your foundation. You have people, and you have financial resources. So without the ambition or the illusion of being ready to solve every problem in a minute, we were in the position to do much better and much more than the independent brands could have done eventually by themselves. The Y Combinator example is interesting because we are not just investing in brands. The truth is that we have a relationship with 70 brands, and some of them are individual projects. So there's an advisory component and a brokerage component on top of the execution. Some of them are very simple sales agency It's an agency
not
representation.
So simple, but
Not so simple, but it is a simple form, contractual form of a sales representation. Most of them in the North America through Goods and Services, which is our wonderful showroom in New York, Los Angeles, and across the country. Some of them are distribution agreements. So we just sell the product, place an order, buy the bulk production, and sell it. And then of course you kind of raise through I would say the ranks of experience, and you might want the full service suite, which is available today for the brands we mentioned before, which means full licensing agreement, full financial support, which means direct-to-consumer management. we had to learn a lot of things. We were born wholesalers. We had no experience in direct-to-consumer. So it's naturally needed for each individual brand to have a direct relationship with your customer. But also doing one brand at a time was incredibly cost inefficient. Yeah. So we built a platform. We hired, I think, the right people, and we started servicing allbrands.com from an operational perspective. Now we run 6 individual brands.coms. And through the experience, we invested in Machine, a multi-brand retailer. So we started learning from them and with them on how running a direct-to-consumer company. So
I'm exhausted just listening to you, Stefano. I mean, I think that's incredible. And I think the fact that, you've also, I read somewhere, sort of have said to designers or, to not only think about direct-to-customer, that there is a nice mix between working with some key retail partners alongside direct-to-customer. So I was really interested in, and we all love Machine and what Stavros does. And I was just curious, what was it that you said, let's invest in physical retail?
So we all went through waves of emotions according to the buzzwords of the moment in the fashion industry. I'm happy to remember that 5 years ago, it was only see now, buy now.
Yeah.
In theory.
That's right, in theory.
Then it was only direct-to-consumer native brands. Then we had a pandemic, you may remember.
Slightly, yeah.
and of course, direct-to-consumer is basically the only way to deliver. Allegedly, Stavros jokes all the time, complimenting me for having invested in a closed store.
Which you might be the only one,
which requires
the courage,
require courage
and vision,
and a lot of respect for what Stavros has done and who Stavros is, of course. But the honest answer is that there isn't one way to promote a brand or to sell a brand. There are multiple channels, and external factors can privilege one or the other depending on the moment. Obviously, during a pandemic, a direct-to-consumer channels is vital. But like Jose Neves repeats, even if it's 25 or 27% of the business happening on direct-to-consumer, well, there's the majority done through wholesale, physical retail. Yeah. And wholesale has been, named a bad word for quite a long time, which I felt was inappropriate because bad wholesale was bad.
Yeah.
Whereas there still is, and I humbly believe there will be for a long time, the need for few hundreds, not dozens, few hundreds of independent or largest retail stores, physical or online retails, who are able to support independent designers, who are able to promote the brands locally, who have a different cluster of customers. Despite the appearance, there's very little overlap between customers, and are effectively acting as a local gallery. And I do believe there is a customer out there, a young customer specifically, because we are, of course, focusing on the youth culture for the most, who are fascinated by the creation of brands by an individual rather than by the brands themselves. Right. Otherwise, everyone will just walk out of the door and go to an incredibly beautiful Gucci or Balenciaga or Louis Vuitton store to buy what they want. Yeah. The reality is that there is a sensibility of an early adopter, Gen Z customer, which we all read will represent 50% of the business in a few years, who doesn't want to be dictated what to wear, has a little bit less interest in legacy brands, because probably it associates luxury to a different generation, or has a different definition of luxury. Needs to identify with a value system or with the funder who is a representative of a community, needs to have a personal relationship and connection, and because of that needs to access a product through a credible source, and that credible source is the editor, the curator, or the gallerist, which is the multi-brand retailer. So Stavros is a gallerist, a very brave, incredibly talented gallerist in London and in Shanghai now. And that's why we decided to support him.
Well, I definitely think that, judging by even just like the footfall, the traffic in central London, and seeing how kind of the drive back into physical, sort of the experience, the touching, the sort of seeing what the new RAF or the new A Cold Wall or Martine Rose collection actually feels like has become so much more apparent that we're all sort of, every generation is desperate to sort of feel and try on,
and experiencing it. I mean, another unspoken truth is that retail sales on physical stores are the most profitable across all channels.
Right.
As we know in direct to consumer, there are a lot of wonderful brands being very successful. There are 3 or 4 fashion brands which are very successful, which are DHL, Meta, Google, etc., etc. Yes. It's an old joke.
Logistics and aggregators, yes.
Exactly. It's just an old joke, of course, but the reality is that it costs a lot to transact a brand. And it costs a lot to acquire a customer. Actually, you normally acquire at a single transaction, almost never a customer, digitally. So we are excited about physical retail at the right size, at the right curation. You mentioned, rightly so, you can find the new RAF or the new Margiela or the new Martine, but also depends how it's both. You go to Machiné, you have an extremely directional take on each collection.
Right.
And a fantastic talent scouting on top of it. The reality is that sometimes the curator is as important as the brand. And as a passionate art, aficionado, I look at the gallery even before I look at the artist. And somehow the new generation is exactly doing that.
Do you have any advice for then any young brands or designers watching this around how to think about creating a sustainable, responsible brand and business?
Well, I don't refer to myself as an expert in sustainability by any means. I am blessed to have Julie Gehardt with me, who is extremely knowledgeable and extremely focused on that. A fully sustainable product doesn't exist. I think educating your customer, or designing your brand and company around the idea of a slower pace to market and a longevity are the most critical things. Nobody can believe that dropping a new release every 3 weeks, regardless of how much vetting you can do in your supply chain, is by any means sustainable. Sustainable is investing, not even spending, investing whatever money you have available on a smaller number of items. You can pay them as you wish now. You can pay them in installments because, we're always talking about these luxury customers. There's a world out there as a full right to purchase a piece which represents a dream. But now you can pay it through installments. Stick and take care of the product, of the item. It will age wonderfully. It will be meaningful. It doesn't need to be replaced every 6 months or 3 months or 2 months. So for a brand and a designer is think about longevity and durability when you design the project. I think that's the main item. And for the consumers, the consumption patterns are somehow responsible for the unsustainability of this industry. I have to say it. Ordering 4 pieces from an online store just to send back 3.5 is not sustainable. It might be free for now and it won't be free forever. It's totally unsustainable. That consumption pattern, the idea of needing to replace a product with another, the perception that new is better than better, it's probably one of the main issues.
Challenges,
one of the main challenges. So I would definitely advise to buy less.
But buy better.
But buy better to stick to the product forever, essentially.
Like your helmet line coat.
My helmet line coat and my,
No, absolutely. What is keeping you really optimistic about the fashion industry these days, Stefano?
I'm an optimist, naturally. as an entrepreneur, you shouldn't.
You have to be.
You have to.
That's true.
You have to be. Sometimes it requires a deep fate, right? The fashion industry, the luxury industry, is predicted to grow, and it will grow, most likely because it responds to one very important need, which is self-accomplishment or improving self-esteem, and it's a joy to purchase an item you love, of course. I'm optimistic about a part of the fashion industry. I realize that we are in a world where there are conglomerates running incredibly large, incredibly successful, beautiful businesses, and they have been growing at a pace which is incredible again. So, utmost respect to them, and we are very happy to learn from them. However, there's a new generation of customers which will think differently, buy differently, shop differently, experience the fashion differently. And I'm extremely optimistic about the chances of independent insurgent brands or group of independent insurgent brands to capture a much wider, larger audience in the near future. Also through the very old school wholesale channel. By the effect of the focusing on direct-to-consumer of larger brands, there's a large space opening up in the wholesale market. As we know, wholesale will survive, will downsize, but every city, every country will have their wonderful retail stores. There's shelving space available for these designers, and there are consumers wanting to express, as you said before, a physical presence in store and purchase power. In fact, as we noticed, independent brands are becoming bigger than I expected only a few years ago.
Wow. Bigger in terms of actual size, in terms of shelf space, in terms of visibility, in terms
of size, and as a consequence, visibility, or visibility as a consequence of actual size. I was referring to Dries Van Noten many times, Dries Van being again son of the 90s, being a wonderful size business. A credible designer which was running his business, designing incredible collection, keeping it well controlled and growth. And not that I know much about the size of his business today, but my perception was between 80 to 100 million revenues.
It was like a sweet spot.
A sweet spot where you are always in demand and you keep control of your distribution. I still believe that's an achievable target for a number, of course, a small number of independent designers. But what we notice is that by the effect of the transformation in wholesale and direct-to-consumer to a certain extent, there are an increasing number of brands who are crossing the marks of 200, 250 millions, which I didn't perceive as a realistic target for until a few years ago, or let me say for a couple of years ago. We have wonderful examples of friends of ours. Jacques Mus is a fantastic example of a brand which has been scaling dramatically. It took Simone like 8 years to reach 10 or 15 millions, and then it's over 200 now.
Rocket ship,
my very good friend Mike Amiri showed that you can do luxury in Los Angeles, and that you can grow to 200 million plus in turnover in just about 6 years. Or again, Jerry Lorenzo, which we have been working with closely for the Zegna collaboration, that scale his business to, I would suspect, around 200 millions again. Ami, opening stores
that's
everywhere.
True. Actually, there are so many benchmarks now.
They are maybe forgetting someone, but I'm just saying, and these are all, these all happened in the past few couple of years, maybe. And we ourselves, we're saying that. We see brands like Ecole Wall, which has been scaling and growing 40% last year, or as you guess, Coperni doing wonderfully. And Coperni people tends to forget, but Coperni restarted the operations in 2008. 18.
Yeah, I remember that you had a tiny place in your Paris showroom.
Yeah, it was
incredible.
We restarted the operations 3 years ago, and is maybe one of the most famous brands in the world today.
Yeah.
And obviously, Seb and Arnaud are running this business incredibly well, and they are incredibly smart and talented. This is a brand which was going to grow sizably and fast.
Yeah.
These are 2 examples, but there are many other examples of incredible talent. So I think the future of the fashion industry is bright in general, but what I'm more interested in, the future of Insurgent brands, is extremely bright, and we escaped the conjure of, the winner takes it all. I believe there will be space for everyone, and I would envisage more collaboration between large brands and small brands in the future, rather than competition.
I love that. Last question. What piece of advice would you give to any young creative entrepreneur today that either you had been told in the past or that you can now yourself share?
So one piece of advice is that unless you are in the unique position of having never-ending funding available, which is rare.
Very rare.
Which is rare. Your success will depend on collaboration at every level, and your business model should be realistic. And to be realistic, I mean you should be able to calculate the resources you have available and take one endeavor at a time. And for those areas of the business you are not either capable financially or is not your forte, you should be seeking advice and help and support. So I've been speaking pre-pandemic more than now, to be honest, with a lot of incredible talents who wanted to build up a vertical maison, like Dior or like Balenciaga. And I, unfortunately, have to count a lot of them between the ones who are not in business anymore. It's virtually impossible to build a vertical maison from scratch. It's important to understand the endeavor of doing something like that is in the tens of millions of dollars of investment. It's instead possible to have a big idea, unique community, a visual identity which is perfectly, fitting your messaging, and build sales and momentum if you are able to collaborate with other partners and companies. And last but not least, we all learn that life is too short to deal with the wrong people. So I would expect that being nice will be a superpower in this economy, in the future economy. So being humble and nice and respectful, we work in an industry where individualism and egoism has been embedded into the industry. I think that's really passé. It's really gone for good.
I think coming from one of the nicest men in the industry, I think that's very, very, very good advice. So thank you, Stefano. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us as well. And see you soon again.
Thank you.